Hey everybody, it's Kelly. Welcome back to another episode of Ask a Therapist. Today we're answering a question that a number of you have asked, and that question is, can you be gay and a Christian? I'm actually going to expand that into, can you be a Christian and a part of the LGBTQIA+ community? My answer is, yes, you can. Have a great day. Bye. Obviously, it's not that easy. And I want to be really clear about this video. For those of you who have religious trauma that is actively alive in your life and is creating distress in your day-to-day, this may be a video you might want to think about skipping or watching with a safe person. I want to get to the root of this question though. This question also has come in many forms, like how do I find an affirming church? I've also gotten the question, how do I find an affirming therapist? And that is an entirely other video. An affirming church can be found, and at the end of this video, I'm going to give you some links to check out. Why do you want an affirming church? That's going to give you your answer to what you do next. When someone grows up in a religion that actively encourages you to hide who you are, you have decisions to make when you decide to be real about who you are. For some people, that is when they discover that their religion in reality is not something they choose to hold on to. And other people discover that their religion is what they want to hold on to, not their church. So for people who are looking for a church community of supportive and affirming and kind people, there are ways to do that. There are multiple mainstream denominations of Christianity that will tell you, no, you cannot be queer and be a Christian. I don't agree. They say this because there are a number of passages in the Bible that most of us now call the clobber passages. And in those clobber passages, they're used to clobber a person who is queer over the head with biblical truth. And that biblical truth is that
God made us man and woman for each other for monogamous, long-term, heterosexual marriages.
And for some people, that's accurate. For some people, long-term, heterosexual, monogamous marriage is what fits them the best. Great. That is not the case for everybody. Historically, monogamy isn't even actually the majority of people. Talked about monogamy a number of times in videos, and a lot of the normalization of monogamy as the right way has come from the church. Do other societies that are not church-related have monogamy? Yes. Obviously. The push for that being the most natural way to be comes from the church and the attempt to control. Women are possessions. You give a man a woman. He's a little less wild. He does what you want him to do. The women don't matter anyway because they're property. Blah, 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 blah. In that, you get to control someone. If you tell them that their desires are going to lead them to sin, and the only way to not lead to sin is to do this thing, they're going to do this thing. So then when they see other people years later, or maybe in their same time, that aren't doing it that way, that aren't in monogamous relationships, that aren't marrying a woman if they're a man and a man if they're a woman, that gets confusing then, because for their whole lives, they've bought this line that this is the only way to be, this is the right way to be, and so they've been that way. So you see other people who are doing different things and you're like, well, obviously that's not the right way because I was always told this was the right way. That is a juvenile way of thinking. Just because you were always told something was right and it's right for you does not mean it's always the right thing. This idea that you cannot be queer and be in a church, or you can be queer and be in a church, but you can't be in leadership, or you can't be ordained, or we're not going to sanctify your marriage, but we do want you to give us your money, is totally bizarre. And also another attempt at control. Historically, when the church came to prominence, it made queer people pariahs. Prior to that, sexuality was much more fluid. Identity even was much more fluid. The church decided to come in and make some rules that were going to apply to everyone. In the years since, there are many churches who have turned around and said, this is dumb. There are denominations which have split over the idea of whether or not they are going to be fully affirming of queer people and their relationships. For some, the fact that a church has to make a move or a statement to be affirming is enough to make them not want to be part of that church, and that's okay. Also, for some who have grown up in the faith and know faith to be this light of goodness and this connection to something bigger in their lives, they should not have to miss out on a connection to a body of believers just because some people are stuck in the 17, 16, 1500s. A number of years ago, the Episcopal Church went through a split. They've actually gone through a couple. A couple of the mainline denominations in general have gone through a split over this very topic. And it's one of those topics that really gets to me because as someone who worked in the church for a long time, who was raised in the same denomination that she worked in for a long time, to watch that denomination fall apart over whether or not they thought I was good enough to accept as a person, whether or not my marriage was acceptable to them, and whether or not I should be allowed to work my youth ministry job because of who I am. To watch that fall apart, this thing that had been part of my life for so long, was actually cathartic in the end. There are still things that I am working on. There are still things that I will absolutely need to work through before I can say I'm past all of that. I very much lost my job. I actually lost 2 jobs within a week of each other by being real and honest about who I am. And that was a lot to take because one of them was a job in the church. But when that happened, I was free to understand the difference between God and Christians and between Christians and the church. There's a lot of churches out there that are flawed. And in fact, just because you find an affirming church does not mean they're not going to be flawed. Those passages in the Bible that are used to tell queer people that they are not accepted or loved or whole are misinterpreted. There's a movie coming out called the 1946 movie. Well, it's called 1946. It has been a labor of love, a very intense labor of love for a lot of people for a lot of years. The makers of this movie set out to show everyone what a mistranslation those clobber passages are. And it's called 1946 because until 1946, the word homosexual did not exist in the Bible. Prior to when it was changed into homosexual, it was a word that referred to adults who took advantage of children. If we just sit for a minute with the idea that those translating the Bible in the 1940s thought it appropriate to unify those 2 words, that's staggering. Whether it was on purpose, whether it was accidental, whether it was a sign of the times and what people understood, there have been since then multiple times that the Bible itself has been called into question because these are facts that we know. The fact that word did not exist in the Bible until then, and definitely not in that way. What it replaced was a word that meant something completely different and was saying something completely different. The fact that at no point any major denomination has made a move to fix that translation is problematic, but also a sign of where we're living today. Because I have a hunch that any denomination that were to attempt to do that would then be called heretics and blah, blah, blah. So it's one thing to accept and affirm within your church as long as the other people who call themselves Christians can go and hate people in their churches and it's fine. But if you call them into a room and try to talk to them about how hate is not okay and their hate is based on a lie, it'll blow their minds. They cannot hear that. And I think that's probably why no denomination has done that, because nobody can actually exist without people attending. But I'm hoping that this movie is one that we can just sort of blow up out there and get people to understand the truth of what has happened in Bible translation. Now, please understand what I'm saying right now is not meant to be an indictment on all Christians everywhere. It is the reality of where we are, and I want you to recognize then how important it is to find a church that is openly affirming, not just quietly affirming. There's a couple different ways you can find those churches. One is gaychurch.org. There is a directory by zip code of churches that are affirming. So if you're watching this and you belong to an actually affirming church, not just
we just don't talk about it and it's fine,
but like an actively affirming church, make sure you're listed on that site. So people who are asking this question can go directly there and find a church close to them that's able to really recognize Christian fellowship and what they're supposed to be doing as a community for everyone. The vast majority of Episcopal Church at this point are openly affirming. If they aren't, and you want to stir up some trouble, you can call their diocese because they're supposed to be. There's a lot that's given to the local diocese and a lot of power that's given there. So there are some churches that aren't, but the ones that are open about it on their website. So always check check a church's website before you go there. And then finally, I want to suggest the Reconciling Ministries Network. This is a United Methodist Church network that is openly affirming congregations. They're called reconciling congregations because they're not just about bring everybody in and yes, we're all here and we're all loved. It's about reconciling the harm the church has done for years to the queer community and rectifying those relationships, building bridges, being the real church in the world the way that you're supposed to be and not the way history has told us to be. Like I said earlier, there is a denomination that I worked for many years, still do, and they are going through this division. In being so intimately involved in the division and in the decision to divide and what that looks like for the Methodist churches in Florida, at least, being so involved in that has been both life draining and life giving. There's so much hope there in the fact that there are church people who really don't want to have this argument over and over again. Their whole point is anybody who's a Christian belongs here. Anybody who's a Christian belongs in full connection, and they belong in these things we're doing. Because this is a fight that should have been over years ago. And in reality, we're dealing with the social justice matters that are happening in our world. And we're dealing with the fact there are hungry children and there shouldn't be hungry children. Do you know that if every church in the US helped one family in their church get a child out of the foster care system in our country, there would be no children in the foster care system in our country? But sure, let's have arguments over paving a parking lot and whether or not we're going to let gay people be in leadership. Sure. So obviously there's baggage there. There probably is for you too, or you wouldn't be asking this question. The bottom line is, if you have a desire to be in community with other Christians, this is the way to do it. Finding a church through one of those directories, looking on a church's website and seeing when they list their core beliefs, what they say about their core beliefs. They talk about,
we believe in a traditional interpretation of the Bible.
Or we believe that, obviously marriage is a man and a woman.
Those are signs. They're not outwardly saying that, but if that's important enough for them to put on their About Us section of their website, that's a central tenet of their church. And that is probably not a church that's going to help you to grow as a person in the way that you want to grow as a person. That's it for today. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all next week. And until then, take care of yourselves and each other.